Okay, looks like we are live, everybody, and I want to welcome you to Standing for Truth. On Standing for Truth, we focus on the truth of biblical creation. We have been honored and blessed to have so many amazing guests on this program who have helped provide amazing scientific evidence confirming the truth of biblical creation. We host interviews, presentations, debates, discussions, and more. Therefore, please, if you enjoy the content coming out of this ministry, please make sure to hit that subscribe button and also tell your friends and family about us as well. I am very pleased to say that today's guest is Dr. Charles Jackson. It is an honor to have Dr. J back with us here on the program. Dr. J has been an incredible blessing to so many, including this ministry. He has given us his time. About 7 months ago, he was here for a show specifically refuting the critics of evolution. I've linked that first discussion with him in the description box, so everybody please check that out. Now, a brief introduction into our guest before I bring him in. Dr. Charles Jackson has 4 degrees in science and education and taught secondary school sciences for 11 years, then college biology and chemistry for 6 years, and then teacher education classes 6. In 2003, Dr. Jackson founded Points of Origins and began teaching, speaking, and debating in creation science education. So let me bring in my guests for today, as well as our award-winning co-host, George Bond. George, thanks for being here. And Dr. J, thanks for being here as well.
No problem.
George, I know you had a brief introduction as well before we hand it over to Dr. J. Go ahead, brother.
Thanks, Standing. I just want to start off with a short prayer like I did with the last couple of streams. To everyone in the audience, may the Spirit of God open your eyes to the light, your ears to the truth, and your heart to his Son, the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Welcome, Dr. Jackson. I appreciate it very much that you take the time. I know it's a busy schedule that you have to help us out. I'm always stoked when people like Dr. Jackson are willing to come to our channel. Now, I've emailed Dr. Jackson quite a few times, as well as spoken to him on Messenger, on Facebook Messenger. And my last email to Dr. Jackson, he was very quick to reply, and he went straight to the point, said, yes, that would be fine, George, and your topic is excellent. There are a million missing links in the chain from the Big Bang to people. Amen. Well, thank you, Dr. J. As you all are aware, this topic is quite substantial. We could probably cover the entire list of missing facts. We couldn't actually possibly cover all the entire missing facts of evolution. I keep saying the only facts about evolution are the missing facts. So if I could boldly ask Dr. J, we could probably make this part 1 of 1,000. So you're welcome to come back for the other 999, Dr. J. Look, I've got a little, I'm not going to race you, Dr. J, but I've got a short little video. I'm going to ask Standing to actually share the screen for me, because I'm going to show a couple of images of a couple of things that I found on YouTube, and let the people in the audience determine who they think it would be. I think you'll catch on pretty quick, Dr. J.
Okay, George, yeah, if you want me to share screen, go ahead, brother.
No worries, I've got, yep.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know what that is.
I want the audience to guess who this is. It's going to render slowly, but there's a prize on offer if you can guess who this particular person is. No, it's not Charles Darwin. It's not even Inspector Clouseau. Good grief. It's not, definitely not Aaron Ra. No, it's not me in an astronaut suit. We're almost there, almost there. Yes, it's none other than the famous Dr. Jackson. All right,
Yep.
Screen's back there. Dr. J, can you just briefly tell us your involvement in that particular project?
That's the quantum pod series that Ralph Streen is working on. He was the director and one of the producers of Genesis Paradise Lost, and liked what I did in that as far as interviewee sort of things and science expert commentary. And he wondered if I had any kind of acting ability. Well, I'm a teacher. All teachers have to have some kind of ability to act because you're up on stage all the time, whether you're disciplining or whether you're inspiring or whether you're explaining something. So yeah, I mean, he worked on that, and it's got an interesting plot. And Ralph has written the screen play for all of this and gives me my cues. And we've done an awful lot of filming and all, and has been working on this project for a while. He's usually the only person working on it. He brings in other people, but it takes a long time to put these things in production phase. And I think it's going to be really cool. It's a cool idea, and it brings in worldview and science. And I play a character named Dr. Jackson, and it involves time travel, and it'll address all these sort of current day, just as it was in the days of Noah sort of things. And how did we get in a mess like this? And how did evolution theory and other ideas of the devils actually bring about the awful mess we see as far as truth goes in the world today?
Thanks, Dr. J. I love the short critiques you do on some of the science articles on your YouTube channel. Now, for those that aren't aware, Dr. Jackson has got a YouTube channel. If you search for it, we'll put it in the description box later, but if you search for it, it's under Charles Jackson. Just be aware that there are heaps and heaps of Charles Jacksons on YouTube, okay? So it might be interesting to, we'll put it in the description box and people can actually click on that link and can subscribe. But I love the way you critique those articles. They're nice and short, but it really exposes what some of those authors are saying. In short, it's nothing more than speculation and conjecture. Yeah. So without taking too much time, Dr. J, I'll hand it over to you. Maybe we can cover the Big Bang and maybe get into the question of evolution a bit later.
Cover the Big Bang. Is that what you want to do right now?
Well, as much of it as you like.
I think the best way to just a little bit. I think the best way to sum it up, Dr. J, into a question that would be appropriate for the time that we have here today would be: what are some of the major problems with secular Big Bang cosmology?
Well, of course, the bang itself at the beginning is the biggest problem. There are so many things. I mean, it violates in all of the requirements for the theory to actually be about something that truly occurred in the past. If you believe in things like time, you have to break every law of science that's required for all of these things to happen. I don't mean required for it to happen. I mean required to break for it to happen. It's the first law of thermodynamics, that matter and energy can't be created or destroyed. I mean, from the word get-go, you already have violated the first law of thermodynamics. And whatever kind of, I'm sorry, but mealy-mouthed little excuse sort of stuff you might give about that, it has to break the first law of thermodynamics. So you've broken a law of science right at the beginning. There's no way that we can finesse that. You have to believe that it was a miracle, whether you believe in a God that makes miracles or Lucky the Leprechaun or however miracles happen. You have broken a law of science by having all the matter in the universe, all the energy in the universe, and even space and time burst out of non-existence into existence for no explicable reason. Oh, the reason given is a quantum fluctuation. Try and look up what that is. It sounds very ingenious, but quantum theory is very complex. I'm not a quantum theorist or a quantum mechanic, but it's really a wonderful idea. But to be dogmatic and say that you must agree with this, and if you don't, you're stupid, or you're against science. The Big Bang Theory is against science from even that very first step. Where did all that matter, energy, space, and time come from? It didn't. It just bead for no apparent reason, but obviously it did because we're here, as though that's the only way we could be here. That's one of the problems I have, is the rationale is, well, obviously we're here, so the Big Bang must be true, which implies that the Big Bang's the only theory that could possibly work. And I hear that kind of reasoning all the time.
Well, that's a great response, Dr. J. George, I know you had a couple comments there, but since questions are flying through, I'm going to get this one on screen before it's too late, because it kind of relates to what you're talking about, Dr. J. We've got a question from Redefine Living. Thank you for your question, Redefine Living. He says, question for Dr. J. Is a protostar instrumental in star formation according to the Big Bang Theory? What are the assumptions?
Well, yes, it is, because if you don't have stellar evolution, then after the Big Bang, all you've got is gas, clouds, and dust, and helium and hydrogen, and some of the heavier elements, that would have been formed by whatever the explosion was. But basically, the universe would be only full of helium, hydrogen, maybe a little lithium, and then all these other things would be there, but in terribly scarce amounts. And then you've got to get stars, because obviously, although they've now realized that 90% of the universe is stuff, 97%, I think I recently heard, is stuff we can't see with optical telescopes, with light telescopes. That 3% was all we ever could see until very recently, when we got other kinds of detectors. So stellar evolution or star formation from protostars is a very important part of the Big Bang Theory. It's like in the 1-2 punch, it's punch number 2. It's step 2 in cosmology and cosmogony and the entire structure and origin of the universe. But it also violates several laws of science and is, according to the known laws of science, not the imagined ones, like the genes condition, according to the known and tested laws of science, stellar evolution is also absolutely impossible. I don't even know where to start with that. Would you like me to pick something, or do you have questions about stellar evolution?
Well, good question, Dr. J. I'll hand it to George. Yeah, George, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, thanks. I like how they posit that it takes a supernova type explosion to get the ball rolling, but I'm going to bring some empirical science into this. We observe supernovas around average every 30 years. And I believe I read somewhere that it takes somewhere like 10 million years for stars to form. So when you do the simple math, that means stars are dying over 300,000 times faster than they're forming. So something's wrong there.
Well, I mean, you could get yourself a little catch-22, dog ate my homework story and say, well, there are a lot of stars forming, and we just don't know how many. Enough of them, they could say that. But this idea that supernova stars exploding could send out a shock wave that could push gas clouds against each other, resulting in a rarefaction and compressional wave from the explosion that could actually cause the extra pressure that would be needed to pressurize gas clouds into stars. protostars because gravity can't, it's not strong enough. The problem is a supernova is a star. And so you got a chicken and the egg problem here.
Yeah.
They'll say gravity waves maybe created these compressions and gravity waves from black holes. But don't forget, a black hole is a star. So if you got a star, is the way that stars got made. Well, how'd that star get made? How did supernovas get made? How did their star get made? How did just normal novae get made? How did black holes get made? The stars they came from, you know, you've still got a chicken and egg problem. Where did the star that came from come from? How did stars originally form? And so black holes and supernova stars, and I have to emphasize this, have absolutely zero value in explaining stellar evolution, because you need a star to start it with. And so if you're actually if anybody tries to use black holes and supernovae as the instigator of stellar evolution of protostars, they aren't facing the obvious logic and science fact, even as that fact is explained or described by their theory, because there would have been a time in the universe where there weren't any stars. And so there weren't any stars around to make the stars. You see what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bit like your critique on one of the articles where you said dark energy becomes darker energy. The imagination is endless.
And I want to stress, I absolutely love the scientific imagination that is brought to bear by creative people on theories of the universe. I mean, if I didn't believe in a miracle-making God, a creator, who in the beginning created the heavens and the earth, I would have to think of something else, imaginative, on how the universe could have gotten started. And these are wonderful ideas, but then to lay it out to other people and say, well, you're an anti-intellectual if you don't go for this idea I have or that I support. You're an anti-science person if you don't go for this theory that everybody else knows is true. Why don't you get on with it? And I feel like, you know, when Jesus said this generation is weird, you know, you're like children dancing in the street. You know, we have piped for you and you have not danced. You know, they're wondering, why haven't we danced to their Pied Piper? It's because it's fun. It's cool. I mean, I like Warp Drive and Zephram Cochrane and stuff like that because, you know, I'm a science-fi geek and I like sci-fi. But, I mean, this stuff isn't science, though. I mean, it's interesting thinking and it's great to kind of toss it around. But in the end, you're going to have to stop playing volleyball and talk about the beach you're standing on. I mean, and the beach we're standing on is, how did the universe actually start itself? And you can say it just did, and then tell the rest of your story after that. But that's not good science. And even if you give them the universe starting itself, how do you get those stars after that? How does order come out of an explosion? Because now you violated the second law of thermodynamics, which Isaac Asimov, famous atheist and really prolific sci-fi writer, who most people respect and admire. I think he did great work. But he wrote an article in the Smithsonian Magazine entitled, "In the Game of Energy and Thermodynamics, You Can't Even Break Even." And he, in that article, you know, discussed these kind of problems and said that the second law of thermodynamics is the most powerful generalization about the universe that human beings have ever been able to devise. And yet, of course, the order, you know, coming after the explosion violates the second law of thermodynamics. Well, the entropy law, quite obviously. Something must have been guiding. Something must have been funneling, channeling, controlling that energy. But what force could that be? I don't know, God, you know, or like I said, Lucky the Leprechaun, Thor, I don't know, Zeus. But if you're not going to bring out any kind of a supernatural thing, you're going to be limited to natural, and there isn't anything except observations of the universe that say this couldn't happen, not any way that it could.
Well, that's a great response, Dr. J. George, because I've got a ton of questions here, I'm saving some. I see some coming in pertaining specifically to human evolution. We'll save those for a little bit later when we move to that topic. Here's kind of a question, more of a statement from Luca. So he's saying the first law of thermodynamics works fine for us. So I imagine he holds to the Big Bang theory. Maybe there is a better model, but we cannot observe how energy degrades. For now, at least, laws are not absolute. What would be your thoughts on that, Dr. J?
Well, I think it's great for someone to go, yeah, maybe there's a better model. Like with in chemistry and atomic structure, the orbital hybridization theory on chemical bonding. Everybody knows it's not true. The chemistry book I'm teaching out of doesn't mention that, but people in the field know orbital hybridization doesn't happen. But if it could happen, it would explain bond angles and bond affinities and things like that that are happening between atoms and within the electron cloud of atoms that are bonding with each other. It explains things. It predicts things. We go with it being true. Everybody knows it actually does work. But we also know, in the computer simulations, we also know it isn't happening. But we're going with that theory anyway until we actually figure out what's happening. Because it's working for us until then. But people in the research fields know orbital hybridization is not true. It's not real. And we're waiting for someone to win the Nobel Prize by finding out how the atoms are really doing this. So I'm cool with the Big Bang and ideas of that and about the energy dissipation, all that kind of thing, and saying, well, we're just waiting for the real thing. But the person who wrote in must realize that people are clinging to kind of an urban myth that this is a done deal, the Big Bang happened, and all of the problems anybody, including you creationists, might bring up, those are just bogus constructs to throw everyone off of science and to turn us back to the dark ages. Not, I don't see the rest of the question. The first half of the comment by the person, I'm going to say, I think it's great to have imaginative thought in science. I think it's great to go, we've got a model, we can't prove it, but we're using the model. Okay, that's fine. Oh yeah, there you go. Maybe there's a better model. We can't observe how energy degrades. No, we can't, but we can actually we can conceptualize that. We can calculate free energy. We can talk about the concept of free energy. We do know that everything is going to the random state. We do know that energy, as it expresses kinetically in all forms, it eventually goes into an unexpressible state in via entropy and no longer can be active energy anymore. We do know somehow this works ever since Lord Kelvin back in the day, and it's laws are not absolutes. I'm sorry, but that's why we call them laws. Now, unless we find some corollary or something that makes a proviso for the violation of that law, in that case, it wouldn't really be a law. Now, the Altenberg 16, a group of younger renegade evolutionists that went to, I think it was Switzerland, and had a conference just before the year 2000. I heard some of the Altenberg 16 members speak. I've met some of them in person. But one of the guys, and I forget the name of the guy, he said, we now know that the laws are not absolute. The laws are not the laws, and so there's no such thing. If there's no such thing, then now, by definition, you've decided that the ruling force of the universe is your thought, or my thought, or George's thought. And if there aren't laws of the universe, then we know nothing about science. Well, no, you're onto it, Dr. Jackson. That's true. Nobody knows anything. Well, you know what? Tell that to the founding fathers of science, the scientific method. there are laws of the universe, and as far as we know, these laws are absolute. The law of abiogenesis, we found out, is not an absolute because it's not true. Now, what was that? Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. I forget, that was the law of, they had a name for it, but that we found out, that evolution repeats itself in embryonic development. We found out that's not true. Now, and the phlogiston theory, we found out that's not true. And that's okay. And geocentrism, found out that's not true. But the things that are laws of the universe are things that everybody in the world has agreed on. Well, this is so. So, I mean, if you're just talking philosophically about science, okay, fine. But don't insist that people who don't buy it or don't think that same way philosophically, don't insist that people who say there are laws of the universe are scientifically, philosophically, and intellectually inferior. I think that's really manipulating and calling the terms as you want them to be, rather than just honestly looking at truth and logic and the universe and a whole history for the past few thousand years of people who were probably smarter than us. Actually, that's another discussion, and just negating everything that we have built in the enterprise of science and saying none of it mattered. Well, your cell phone's working because of these laws. So I just don't think you can say that laws are not absolutes. I mean, it's the definition of a law. Maybe we're wrong about that law, but if it's a law, it's an absolute. And I don't know why. I have suspicions, and I would have to ask somebody like Luca, why would you want to make a statement that laws are not absolutes? There's probably some other motivation behind that, unless you think that there aren't any absolutes, that the universe doesn't operate by any principles. Albert Einstein said the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible, in the fact that by a few very relatively simple equations, the universe unfolds itself and operates on some really logical system principles. There's no reason it should, but it actually does. And I mean, that's what science is all about. So I think laws have to be seen as, well, laws, and that they matter, and they really do, and that they are absolute, or they're not a law.
Amen, Dr. J. Well said. Well said. Maybe I'll pull up this question here. We've got a very lively chat. We've got over 50 people in the chat right now. So we got a ton of questions coming in, and we really appreciate your answers. So this question comes in from Praise Am. I appreciate the question. There seems to be a magnitude of evidence supporting quantum mechanics is generated by a non-local observer who Christians call God. Do you align mind over matter?
Not in my mind. You've got to understand that if there is a God, that observer would be the actual source. So for the biblical worldview on this, for the intelligent design worldview on this, which supposes an observer, a non-local observer, that mind with a capital M, yeah, in that case, there would be such a thing as mind over matter. I love the idea of E equals MC squared. I watched an old sci-fi thing when I was like 6 on TV. It was a movie, sci-fi movie, Chronos. And it was actually about this robot that came from another planet, was going to destroy our planet by absorbing the energy around it and turning it into matter. And this robot just got bigger and bigger. And the science guys said, we have one side of the equation. We can change matter into energy. That's what nuclear reactions, nuclear detonations are all about. But they have the other side. They can change energy into matter. And actually, that's how God would have had to wind up the universe. If God has all power, all E, which equals MC squared, then all he'd have to do is convert all that energy. And it would take a lot because C squared is a large variable, to make even the tiniest amount of matter, then yeah, I do believe in mind over matter, but only that observer Christians call God, or what some people might call Gaia or Kronos, the ancient Greek god. Yes, that kind of mind over matter, that the universe unfolded from some mind that had the power to generate matter, space, time, and energy with a single thought. Now, I'm waxing eloquent and starry-eyed in my religiosity, but I know this is going to sound weird, but I love this thing about Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins said, I love his honesty, at least, I don't, love his beliefs, but I love some of his precepts. And one of them was, he said, if there was a God, he would have to be so far above us that merely conceptualizing it would be insanity. He's right. Here's an atheist who has a much better image of God than most Christians I meet. And that's there. Most pastors and religious leaders and theological professors. That's why I often say Richard Dawkins would have an awesome, road to, what was that? But Paul, turning into Saul turning into Paul. What was that road he was on? Where was he? Damascus Road experience.
Damascus.
Is that it? Yeah. I think Richard Dawkins would make an excellent Christian because he's consistent. And his idea of what God would be like, it's going to be beyond us. As far as we are beyond an ant or even your dog. You can't explain to your dog why you've got to go to work and earn the money so you can buy the gravy train and puppy chow. The dog doesn't understand supply and demand and economics and a paper-based economy. They don't even, understand gold coins and why you have to leave the dog. The dog just goes with it, But God's going to have to be so far above us. Of course, we can't understand or explain him because we are finite and he's not. So, where were we? Quantum theory. I believe in a mind over matter, but there's only one powerful enough to actually do that. Not mine or yours. And despite whatever ascended masters or spirit guides we might be in touch with, I'm sorry, but we don't have that kind of power. But power might have us, whether it's dark power, and I'm talking satanic or dark evil power, or heavenly power. But we don't have that kind of power ourselves. But other powers involved in the universe can more or less steer things than us. But I don't believe personally, and my personal opinion is that I don't think any evil powers in the universe have creative ability like the heavenly one observer power that we're talking about.
Amen. Well said again, Dr. J. George, did you have any comments, brother, you wanted to make before the next question?
Yes, thank you. Just to transition away from the Big Bang, otherwise we'll be here forever. In terms of favorite lines of evidence for a young universe, I read recently regarding the latest Cassini findings about the Saturnian system. Apparently, this is what they say: the rings have youth written all over them. They actually say to be consistent with the observed clear rings, the rings must be as young as 10 to 100 million years. So what they're saying is that's a maximum. And they're surprised that those rings actually show a young age rather than 4.5 billion years, which is the narrative at the moment. So if you could just talk about some of the evidences for a young creation or a young universe.
Well, I want to comment on the Saturn ring thing. I mean, we had a center probe that took detailed data, and then 25 years later, we sent another probe that took comparable detailed data. The technology was better, but we got data points that were corresponding, and the rings have shifted. Not where you could see it in a telescope, but the measurements. Now, shepherd moons they could gravitationally shepherd streams of rocks, space rocks floating around in the rings, and alter it. Can't explain that. The rings of Saturn have not established equilibrium yet. And if they're 4.5 billion years old, they should have by now. It's like our moon is assumed to have established an orbital equilibrium. I think God just created it this way, a tidal equilibrium, where the same side of the moon faces us, because as it goes around us, it rotates exactly at the same rate as it revolves. And so we always see the same face of the moon. We never see the dark side from here. Shouldn't the rings of Saturn also have established an equilibrium? But they're in flux, and they should have established an equilibrium a long time ago. And so that's the Cassini data that you're talking about, which I find as an aha moment for young solar system. There are so many other ones, though, that people have brought up. I'm not exactly sure. I kind of addressed that one, but I'm not exactly sure what other ones, George, you might be interested in.
Well, we don't have to talk about the young universe, but a young Earth. I mean, we know about carbon-14, yet we keep hearing all these rescue devices, which all have been debunked with regards to the diamond isn't organic carbon. Well, it doesn't really make a difference, does it? The C14's there, so they have to explain why the C14 is in there, whether it's organic or not.
Well, you have to have an organic system to absorb the carbon-14 from the environment and put it into a mineralized bone or horn or skin or wood or carbon print or something like that. Carbon-14 just doesn't soak into carbonate compounds that are just laying around. It's absorbed and then incorporated into a living thing. And no evolutionist uses carbon-14 because the half-life, 5,720 years, is too short to do anything other than, archaeology and, anthropology and stuff like that. You're not going to date anything that is old enough that between that time and now, any appreciable Darwin-style evolution would have happened. So no evolutionist uses carbon-14. They use the other dating methods with isotopes that have longer half-lives. Carbon-14 is just the famous one. But as you know, there are all kinds of things that play into carbon-14 that indicate a young Earth situation. But I mean, when you're talking about the young solar system, though, the Poynting-Robertson effect, we talk about a short period comets, and the rings of Saturn. Those are kind of biggies.
I guess if I could interject something, because this is such a common question from the critics, Dr. J, and I know you've spoken on it before, so I think it'll be a beneficial question for the audience as well. And I guess, what is the best response to the critics of young Earth creation who claim that distant starlight is a major unsolvable problem for the young Earth creation model, Dr. J?
Well, anyone who brings that to the table must be aware of D. Russell Humphrey's white hole cosmology. It's totally Einsteinian relativistic. It's totally consistent with all theories of matter, space, time, and energy in the universe. It's consistent with the biblical worldview understanding of how the universe came to be. There's a short story and a long story. There's actually a 20-minute video on posted up on the internet somewhere of me explaining. And there's also a nice 25-minute video of D. Russell Humphreys explaining white hole cosmology. The idea, and basically, gravity slows down time. And the gravity well that would have been created in a biblical worldview universe as God was making the heavens and the earth in week 1 of the universe actually is consistent with a slowing and even maybe a stopping of time by the gravity field that would have been around. That's kind of, I'm not actually giving, I'm kind of throwing out some tidbits from the theory, but Dr. Humphrey's book, Starlight in Time, Josh Hartnett's version of this of that kind of cosmology, who's also a creationist astronomer, Jason Lyell's version of that kind of cosmology, who is also a creationist astronomer, and whatever Danny Faulkner, the stellar astronomer in the creationist community, might have to add to that. But basically, time, along with space, can be bent, stretched, and stalled by gravity. And when you actually look at what must have happened, might have happened, could have happened with the universe, we've got a very good model that only depends on there being a God who stretches forth the heavens as a curtain, with the stretching of time in addition to the stretching of space. So, I mean, I can't really explain Whitehall cosmology in a couple minutes.
It's very
right towards the video of Humphreys explaining it, towards a video of me on YouTube explaining it, towards the other ones who have spoken on this. But the starlight problem, we creationists juggled around a few models and rejected a bunch of them, like the light gets tired on its way here, or the light created in transit theory. Both of those bothered me because they required some post-creation violations of the laws of the universe, whereas the creation of the universe and the setting up of the laws is a miracle. But I think for some reason it seems like God miraculously created the universe, and when you look at the biblical cosmology, in Genesis 1, it looks like after he does all those creative acts, he doesn't do any mega miracles anymore. He parts the Red Sea and has a virgin birth and walking on water, things like that. But it's almost like God set up the universe to run itself. Here in my science room, I've got 3 aquaria, and they've got snails and fish and little freshwater clams and algae and little pond weeds and stuff. And my students are always, 3 times today, students came in here and fed the fish. They think they're going to starve over the summer. I said, no, they'll be all right. They were okay last summer. They just eat the algae. I mean, I have a heater. I don't have a filter in any of those. I just have a heater for the winter because the tropical fish. But the ones I got out of the pond and the creek up at the park here, and these other minnows that are not tropical, they're not temperature sensitive. I mean, I set it up and they take care of themselves. I have to put water in there because it keeps evaporating, especially in the winter when the heaters go. But it's just, I set it up and it takes care of itself by inherent principles that are at work in those. You can't see them. I could turn the camera, but and I think I kind of picture the maker doing that too, setting up the universe, setting it on a roll. Right. He's not impersonal and a distant observer that never gets involved in it. But the big creative work, it's like someone who builds a car and now they're driving it. We don't build a new car every time we leave the garage to go to the grocery store. We have to do that over again. And so to me, that's my little analogy that I'll put to that question.
I like it. I like it. And I wanted to ask Dr. J, when you say white hole cosmology, is this kind of the opposite of a black hole where you'd have matter being pushed out as compared to being sucked in, I guess, as with a black hole?
Yeah. The one part of Humphrey's cosmology where it requires a miracle is that there's this white hole that is a throwing out force of the universe. And that it must miraculously, at one point in the creation week, convert to a black hole. And the event horizon comes rushing back
Right.
to the point of origin, back to the singularity, and with it dragging the starlight along the way behind
Mhm.
it. And it's a ripple in time space also. Now, I love when I read Humphrey's theory for the first time in the 90s. But I also realized evolutionists could make fun of us for believing in anti-gravity or an anti-gravitational force like a white hole emanating this anti-gravity force. But that is exactly the way they more and more describe what dark energy is. It's an anti-gravity force. At
Right.
first, when they first came up with dark energy, which was necessitated to keep the floundering Big Bang model afloat, when they had to come up with dark energy, just as they had to come up with huge amounts of dark matter to hold the galaxies together, they had to come up with dark energy to explain the massive, not massive, but the vast flying away of galaxies from each other, and they conceptualized dark energy, which is they had talked about it in this sense at first, that since matter has a property of creating gravity, that the lack of matter must create anti-gravity. Well, that's almost like saying that if you light a piece of wood on fire, that creates heat, and if you just put a piece of wood out there, it will create cold, or it'll absorb all the heat in the universe around it. So you see the logical flaw in that thinking, that the absence of matter would naturally be an anti-gravitational force. This is a non thing creating a thing that is a force. It's not just a virtual particle deal. Like gravity might be with gravitons, and there's evidence that there might be such a thing as gravitons. That's actually exciting, and it helps evolutionists in some of their cosmology ideas. But it's also something that could actually be true. And the new thing with gravity waves actually being detected and gravitons being possible, even anti-gravitons being possible, but not an anti-gravity graviton. Anti-gravity, I think it would take a miracle, but it would be a part of the white hole cosmology. Yes, it's anti-gravity, but that can't be criticized at this point by the Big Bang cosmologists, because it is now canonized into Big Bang structures and conceptions of the universe that anti-gravity is a thing. They've now canonized it as a thing, so they can't mock us for having anti-gravity as a feature of our cosmological model, white hole cosmology, which is not the only one out there, but I feel more comfortable with it, flowing with biblical worldview and flowing with the known laws of science, is white hole cosmology. I don't know. I commented on that. I don't think we understand anti-gravity as it may or may not exist, but it's theoretically possible. But I don't see how nothing could generate it. I do see how something like a white hole could generate a force.
Well, once again, well said. And I think because we could be here all day with the amount of questions I have pertaining to Big Bang, young Earth, I'll choose this one last question because the topic of the day is Big Bang to humans. So then we'll start kind of wrapping it up with some questions specifically on human evolution. So I guess this question pertaining to white hole cosmology has to do with redshifts. Are redshifts a problem for our model? And Andrew Cumming puts forth a question: why are distant galaxies redshifted when they should be blue shifted? I guess if Earth is a massive gravity well. Any thoughts on that, Dr. J?
Okay, if Earth is a massive gravity well, why are distant galaxies redshifted when they should be blue shifted, if this is true? Earth is a massive gravity well, but the sun is a gravity well 25 times more massive than Earth's gravity well. Jupiter is a gravity well that's 2.5 times our gravity well. And those galaxies are hugely more matter. And since gravity is a property inherent in matter, of course, you need to have huge amounts of matter for that to be true. Equals mc squared. C is a very large number, 300,000 kilometers per second, 186,000 miles per second. Then you square it. So it really affects the equation greatly. But in the universal law of gravitation, Newton's equation, which Cavendish and others refined later, the constant g is a tremendously tiny constant, which means you have to have a huge amount of matter to get any appreciable gravity. We're standing on an 8,000 mile thick ball of rock, and we only get this 9.81 meters per second squared gravitational acceleration. It's not a lot of gravity for that much matter. And we do have a gravity well. But these galaxies are flying apart from us, and they're getting further from us. Big Bang cosmologists and creationist cosmologists all agree the galaxies are flying apart from each other. And all of them see each other getting farther from each other for the most part. So both models predict redshift for galaxies, and none of them predict a preponderance of blue shifted galaxies, except in what we call the local group. There are a few galaxies that in this exodus from each other, there are a few of them that are just by happenstance traveling at us, or are at least traveling away from the center faster than we are, and they're catching up with us. There are a few galaxies in the local group that are blue shifted because the distance between us is closing, which causes the light to be blue shifted. But no one predicted, not creationists, cosmologists, or Big Bang theorists, no one has predicted that any real appreciable number of galaxies should be blue shifted, but that all of them, the great vast majority of them, should be red shifted by both of these models. So no, there's no massive gravity well of Earth sucking galaxies toward us, causing them to be blue shifted, because for two reasons. One, our gravity just isn't substantial unless you happen to be some small object in Earth's gravitational field compared to a galaxy's size. And also, we don't expect, for any other reason either, any of the galaxies to be, many of them to be heading toward us. They should be going away from us. So that's all consistent, whether you're a Big Bang theorist or a white hole cosmologist.
Awesome. And George, maybe if you wanted to kind of shift us to the human evolution aspect of today's topic, and that'll kind of be the last portion of this. We've had a ton of great questions and answers from you, Dr. J, on the Big Bang, and as well as evidence pertaining to young Earth creation. So George, I'll let you kind of direct us in terms of the next question and topic. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, thank you. I'm conscious of the limited time we have with Dr. J. So
I'll come back for the other 999.
I'm going to keep you to that. Okay, well, in a recent article from the American Museum of Natural History, there's a senior researcher by the name of Sergio Almesija. I'm sorry I butchered that, but he's talking about hominin origins. He says, I'm quoting here, when you look at the narrative for hominin origins, it's just a big mess. And then he says, there's no consensus whatsoever. People are working under completely different paradigms, and that's something that I don't see happening in other fields of science. So even their own scientists are contradicting the story they give us about how the fossil record shows a progression or a transition into the hominid species. Have you got anything to say on that one before I ask you the next question on junk DNA?
Well, in the evolutionists' worldview of the history of our species, there's still a great admission that the origin of the genus Homo is still shrouded in as much mystery as ever. And even though there have been new fossil finds, there was a time like back in the I think the 70s where they said all of the bones that have anything to do with the genus Homo's evolution could be all fit into a coffin. Now there've been more finds, since the early 70s, of course, but the fossil record, as evolutionists would be exploring it for purposes of doing a family tree for us, is still very, very fragmentary. And the Lucy fossil was famous largely because they found 40% of the bones, which was a huge amount. Normally they find, a couple teeth, a part of the skull, maybe a jaw, or some, leg bones or a kneecap or something like that. It's a hard job what evolutionary paleontologists are trying to do, admittedly. And no wonder they're all working from different paradigms. They're all, at least they're not marrying and insisting everyone marry to one of the theories on human origins. At least they're keeping themselves, open. And they need to, because every new fossil find actually messes up some avenue that somebody had thought of taking in the past. Of course, creationists are going to say you're never going to find a link that brings us back to the most recent common ancestor between simians and hominins, there isn't one. The reason why we have to refer to them as nodes in the family tree is because there are no fossils populating that part of the story. All the fossils are either monkeys, they're either simians or hominins, Homo sapiens, really. And so many of the previous heroes of the flagstone steps going from monkey-like creatures to us, as the monkeys went on to being modern monkey-type creatures, that each of those heroes has been either categorized and can easily be characterized as either just a monkey or a person, not a monkey person. The Neanderthals are now realized as Homo sapiens. And I still have people arguing with me about that, but they interbred with Homo sapiens. And I'm sorry, but the definition is if you can interbreed successfully and have offspring, you're the same species.
Yeah.
And evolutionists like to blur the definition of species and talk about hybrids. But I was taught in college, and I've even seen it more recently than that, in arguments in favor of evolution, saying that's the definition of a species that we still should stick to. That's what Linnaeus said. If it can breed successfully, it's the same species. Neanderthals and human hybrids are being found in the fossil record. 4% of all modern Europeans are carrying Neanderthal DNA. We believe that red hair originated in the Neanderthal population. When I mean we, I mean research scientists. I'm not talking about evolutionists or creationists. I'm not talking partisan. I'm talking researchers have realized it was a dropout of the other pigmentations, almost like albinism, where the red came out. The redheaded people are generally light-skinned as well as light-haired, light eye-colored as well. It's a suite of things, but that the red, it's like when the leaves in the fall lose all their pigments except the orange. It's the same kind of thing. Red hair was not a new color. It was always there, just like the red leaves in autumn. And the other pigments were sort of albinized and dropped out and letting the red show. Men that have like really, really dark jet black hair, they'll tell you every once in a while in their black beard comes out a little red hair. And when it something goes wrong with the pigmentation and the red's the only thing that's left. So what I'm trying to say is the Heidelberg man, Homo heidelbergensis, is now classified as an archaic Homo sapiens. Homo neanderthalensis is really a Homo sapiens variety Neanderthalensis. Cro-Magnon man, which no one ever talks about anymore, but is still kind of famous and rings in the ear as, oh yeah, that is a Homo sapien. And so, there aren't monkey people. And then when you talk about Lucy and you look at all the ape-like features, Dr. David Menton's analysis of those fossils and the other monkey people or pre-Homo fossils, even Homo erectus, that's controversial, and there's not as much fossil evidence for that. But the sexual dimorphism in the erectus fossils is way more like a great ape than like a human. The brain size is way more like a great ape than a human. I tend to fall on the side in the creationist community of erectus actually being a monkey and not a human. But there are people in the creationist community that are more astute in anatomy than I am. I believe that probably Dr. Menton would go with that also being a monkey. When you look at the skull and the jaw and the teeth and the cranial cavity and things like that. So yeah, there's this big rift forming in all of these fossil species where they used to look more like a continuum. They're more like a quantum leap from which means nothing in between, and that's what a quantum is. There's nothing in between those quantum values.
Actually, George, if I could say one thing, brother.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Before I forget, because great response, Dr. J. And also what they're finding, I've got an article in front of me called Human Missing Link Fossils May Be Jumble of Species, and they are referring to Australopithecus sediba, as well as Homo habilis. They've oftentimes looked to as just being a wastebasket taxon, or even Afarensis. I was listening to a presentation from Lee Berger, famous paleoanthropologist recently, who admitted that Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, may be a chimeric species. The accidental mixture of human and ape bones. So like you're saying, what we're finding is either human, ape, and what seems to be artificial species with possibly habilis, sediba. What are your thoughts on that, Dr. J?
Well, Berger is upsetting the apple cart for the other evolutionists so much with Homo naledi and with Australopithecus sediba, and a lot of them don't like him, and their comments. I'm saying this by the comments they make,
right,
as he makes these announcements, and they don't seem to be angry, but they're like, nah, that's Lee Berger again, the guy from Witterson, and he comes up with these sensationalized sort of P.T. Barnum things, and
right.
He gets a lot of press, and Geographic really goes for it, and he gets a lot of attention from these things. But most serious evolutionary theorists are not taking his stuff too seriously, and I did not realize he was going for Lucy as being chimeric. And in that case, I could see why some of them are getting a little ruffled feathers because he would become very annoying. Because Lucy, although Lucy has been abandoned by some of their researchers as being as significant as she was first thought, they still don't like. I don't think they would still like somebody erasing her totally from the family tree, or saying she was a combination of bones that came from a whole bunch of different things, like the brontosaurus.
Well, great points. Yeah, go ahead, George. And then the next question I think we're going to use to kind of wrap everything up, since we're going a little bit over an hour now. And there's one specific question that I think is going to complete this topic. But yeah, George, go ahead, brother.
I was just going to conclude on that particular topic by quoting what the American Museum of Natural History said in a press release. I'm not going to quote the whole lot, but effectively it says, and I'm quoting here, it says, evolutionary scenarios are appealing because they provide plausible explanations based on current knowledge, but unless grounded in testable hypotheses, they are no more than just so stories. How many times have we said their explanations are just so stories? And they conclude by saying, overall, the researchers found that most stories of human origins are not compatible with the fossils that we have today. Please note what I said. They say are not compatible with the fossils that we have today. Yet we keep hearing from evolutionists that evolution is a fact. How can it be a fact when people like the American Museum of Natural History are saying these things? And it's not just them. There are multiple other sources that are saying exactly the same thing.
Well, when they called it plausible scenarios or plausible explanations of current knowledge, I can see why an evolutionary theorist would see these as plausible explanations, but what they're referring to as current knowledge is really a model.
Yeah.
They're currently most highly accepted, fashionable, in vogue model. It's not current knowledge. What they're looking for is something commensurate with their model. And that's what scientists do. Of course, you're supposed to be trying to prove the null hypothesis constantly. You're constantly supposed to be trying to prove that your theory is wrong and hope that when you punch it in the abs, it can take it. When Mary Schweitzer first found the red blood cells in the T-Rex femur, her mentor said, "I want you to spend a year trying to prove you're wrong." And that's the way science works. And she did, and she just kept finding more and more of these kinds of things in soft tissue. And as you know how that's gone since 2005. It was actually in the 1980s, I believe, that 1985 or something, they started finding this stuff, but it wasn't until 2005 when she got some actual positive press in the peer-reviewed journals that this was real. But to say that they're finding, trying to find these fossils that are plausible explanations for current knowledge, it's not current knowledge that they are handling in this endeavor. It's current, most accepted, widely accepted models or theories. For the non-science people out there, I'm talking about theories or hypotheses or posits that they're working here. When they say common knowledge or current knowledge, what they're talking about isn't knowledge. It's not objective evidence and fact. It's the interpretation of everything, trying to make it fit, looking for stuff to try to make the model shored up a little bit better than it is now, and they're having troubles with that. The plausible explanation is even more theoretical than their current knowledge or their current model is. So I don't mind people trying to find explanations. I don't mind people coming from a totally different viewpoint as me in trying to find explanations and make models. But when they equate it with knowledge and they say that the theory is knowledge and evolution is a fact for which no further proof is needed, that evolution has no holes in it, that evolution has been proved already, there is no controversy. That's not what the data is saying. That is what you and your little friends in your hearts are saying to one another. And the fact that you're the vast majority doesn't change the nature of the universe or the truth. And it doesn't make laws no longer laws. In that case, you're just, it's pretend then.
I read recently where I'm just going to quote here. It says, human origin stories don't need to be compatible with the fossils. they only need to be compatible with the theory. I think that's what you were touching on before. But to move on to probably our last topic standing, because where are we? 1 hour, 11 minutes.
Yeah, I've got a question here that I think is going to wrap it up nicely, George, if you don't mind, brother. Because,
okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Since we've gone from Big Bang, obviously, to young Earth creation and human evolution, this argument, Dr. J, you discussed with Dr. Herman Mays, actually, in your debate with him. And I think you did a fantastic job. It was a great debate. And it's an argument that's been used for years in support of human evolution. So I definitely want to get this in there. And the question is, it comes down to the chromosome 2 fusion. Do you believe that this is truly the knockout argument for ape to man evolution? And what would be the best way to respond to that, Dr. J?
Well, as a science person, as a biologist, I think it's a non-issue for the evolutionists. As a matter of fact, I think it should be something they should be afraid to bring up. The human chromosome 2 fusion, which looks a lot like a simian fusion, it's not surprising that that our DNA looks the same as monkey's DNA. Structure follows function. I mean, our DNA would have to look like a species that is physiologically and structurally the most like us of any other species. And our chromosomes would have to look similar, whether we had a common designer or a common origin. But the fusion is a real problem, which I'm shocked that after people have had time to think about it, they're still following suit with Kenneth Miller, as Herman Mays did in that debate. And when you explain to them that it's actually evidence against evolution, they pretend not to understand the point you made. Now, as a teacher, my job is always to bring otherwise ethereal, complex, fuzzy science to a logical and easy to understand explanation to an audience. I think that Albert Einstein said, if you can't explain it simply, you just don't understand it well enough. And I think that there are greats in the evolutionist community who are very good speakers. I heard Stephen Jay Gould speak once, very excellent teacher. Carl Sagan, a gifted man who could bring high science to the understanding of the general public. And that's what I try to do, especially since I know my audience are not academicians. They're lay people or students or undergrads or even grads. No simian has the fusion. Only humans have this fusion. If the fusion did happen, then it would have to have happened exactly, for evolution to be true, it happened to happen exactly at the moment in evolutionary history where apes had changed into people. Because if it happened before that, some apes would have the fusion.
Yes.
If it happened after that, then some humans would not have the fusion. Do you see? It's actually very powerful evidence that humans and apes are not related genetically at all. I know we have one less chromosome than the apes do, and that one of our chromosomes looks a lot like, I would not be surprised if sometime in the human past, in the biblical worldview, biologically speaking, that humans had 24 chromosomes just like the simians. And that 2 of our chromosomes did fuse to make our current, what we call chromosome number 2. That actually makes a lot of sense to me. It may have happened before the flood. And knowing everybody who survived the bottleneck effect of the ark, where there are only 8 representatives of our species left, 3 breeding couples, actually. We're all descended from one of those 3 breeding couples.
Right.
I wouldn't be surprised if the fusion happened after the Garden of Eden, maybe as an accident, as a result of the fall, genetic mechanics not working as well as it did. But fusions can happen, and it happens all the time. Down syndrome can be a 1421 translocation, which is a mini fusion, or it can be trisomy of chromosome number 21. So, these splicing of chromosomes can happen, but the fact that it's never found in any simian today, and if it ever did exist, there are no surviving descendants of that simian, so there's no evidence. You can pretend, but it's not science because there's no evidence. And the fact that no human is without diffusion, this is only evidence that diffusion, if it ever was a fusion, I tend to believe that diffusion occurred. A lot of creationists say it didn't, and that's okay. But if I'm arguing with an evolutionist who believes in diffusion, then I'll go with it. But the fact that all humans have it and no simian does is actually very powerful, clear, logical evidence that verges on proof, the definition of proof, that humans and simians have never had a genetic ancestry in common at all, and don't today because of that. So I think the human chromosome to fusion idea is not only not a slam dunk for evolution, it's actually a backfire on them. And they're shooting themselves in the foot with this thing.
Right.
We're touting it. I don't hear many other creationists bringing up this point, but I trust that the logic of what I just said, even on a low-level knowledge of genetic science, makes a lot of sense. And people might criticize me, well, that's all you've got, Dr. Jackson, is a low-level knowledge of genetic mechanics. Bring your genetic mechanics up to doctoral degree in genetic mechanics if you want, and it still holds water that this is evidence for non-relation to simians, not that we're related or descended.
Dr. J, you must be listening to Standing for Truth, because we often say they shoot themselves in the foot. Are you a secret subscriber?
I think this is an evidence of convergent evolution. Convergent thinking, if like the multi-regional theory or and stuff like that for human evolution, I think this shooting themselves in the foot thing might be a commonality because it's a common phrase people use, and it's also what they're doing. And so
it's exactly
just realizing it like I realized it. I apologize if I appear as stealth and all that, but I actually I have 3 jobs, and I'm a teacher, and I don't have as much time now that it's summer.
Who needs sleep? Who needs sleep?
And stuff.
I love that, Dr. J, because in the case of junk DNA, they didn't just shoot themselves in the foot, but they blew their foot off. I'm not going to talk. Yeah,
I think that the thinkers in the evolutionist community realized this and about junk DNA, and they decided to throw it overboard in 2012. Finally, to the chagrin of many of their friends, but I think it was very wise. It was sinking their ship.
Yeah. And one thing I'd like to say, because your answer was so good on the fusion, Dr. J, in that if there was a fusion event, based on what we know of genetic drift, because we have the flood bottleneck, 3 reproducing couples, as you pointed out, we can easily explain a human line related fusion event, because even the evolutionists would admit that even according to their model, it would have had to happen after the split. So at best, they have indirect evidence anyways. So if there was a fusion, we can explain it best because we have the bottleneck where it can easily be passed on to every single human being. So that's a great
problem, and all of that at the time of the flood would not have been genetically dangerous. So people will say, oh, no, you can't have it. The whole human race can't come from 3 couples. Oh, yes, it can. It actually wasn't until Leviticus that you were forbidden to marry your sister or your half sister or that close a relative, because Abraham married his half sister, and that coupling was pretty successful in creating a very large descendant group, a gene pool that was very viable up to this very day, even though Sarah was Abraham's half sister. Later, the Mosaic law says, "Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy father's daughter." No more marrying your sister, even if she's your half sister. And of course, today the mutational buildup has reached so much, a la John Sanford. You can't even marry your cousin. In the state of Virginia, where I live, it's illegal unless one of you agrees to be sterilized, because it's medically dangerous because of the buildup of those common in family 300 to 600 lethal recessive genes that you could be both donating to your offspring and have horrible birth defects, or just it's bad for the gene pool. Inbreeding, we know, is genetically a bad idea. In today's polluted with mutation gene pools, yeah.
And that's why I'll say this, because you brought up so many good points. That's why I find there's still a lot of evolutionists in 2021, believe it or not, Dr. J, that want to hold to the junk DNA paradigm because of what you're talking about, these nearly neutral mutations that are being passed on from generation to generation, degenerating, biological organisms. They need to maintain junk DNA so those mutations can be absorbed by the junk DNA. Because if there's relatively no junk DNA, every single mutation is essentially deleterious to the genome, which puts shelf lives on genomes. Evolution couldn't happen.
Well, they read the journals. They know the reports that started coming out before 2000, then in 2007, and in a huge amount in 2012. They read it. It goes in one eye, and they're not letting the left hemisphere of their brain know what the right hemisphere knows. And it's just denial if you're still holding on to junk DNA, just like it's denial if they're still holding on to junk organs. There's no vestigial DNA either.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to jump in here, George,
but not vestigial.
Amen. Dr. J and George, I'm going to give you some last words too, but we are going on an hour and a half. So I want to say this hour and a half, Dr. J, has really flown by. And I want to thank you again for being so generous with your time. I also want to point out to the audience, we've had a really good chat with a lot of good questions this afternoon. I have linked our previous talk with Dr. J in the description box, where we also discuss many other topics as well. So please check that out. And lastly, we got a super chat from Logical, Plausible, Probable on YouTube. Thank you so much for the support, brother. He has his part 2 of his James Tour interview airing tonight. So please check that out.
I wanna mention James Tour.
Yeah.
He has been lampooned by his critics just for the fact they think they've blown the lid on him, that he's an evangelical Christian who loves Jesus and believes the Bible's true. So that doesn't mean he's scientifically ipso facto wrong. I just cannot believe. I'll say one little story.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let's see now. Where was it? When I'm in an audience and hecklers in the audience, university professors usually will ask me how old I believe the Earth is, and I say it's 6,000 years old. They believe that instantly means that I must be wrong about everything else. And I've asked them, well, what makes you think the Earth is billions of years old? And I was debating the Dean of Sciences at University of Nevada, Las Vegas some years ago. And that same week, Kevin Padian from National Center for Science Education was also speaking at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. We actually met and chatted a little bit. But the next day, that was the presentation. The debate was not when Padian was there. But when I was debating the Dean of Sciences, he spent a lot of time just showing little captures of things I'd written on my website showing that I believe the Bible was absolute truth. And he felt like that showed that I wasn't real. I wasn't a scientist. That people like that are already preconceived idea, like he's not, that just proved bad stuff. And so when I saw this guy accusing Tours of being shallow because he confesses to be a real Christian, I'm like, so you're a real atheist or whatever. And that does not mean that you can't step outside of that just because you're glorifying God in your model and someone else is glorifying, I don't know, the consciousness of the universe in their model. It has zero to do with the validity of your model, unless you're just thinking someone is a total charlatan. I mean, you can call someone that, but you better have a little teeth to that bite first. And I just don't see it. But I'm impressed with Tours, and I've been showing little videos of him to my dual enrollment in advanced biology class, and they're enjoying that.
Amen. Well said, Dr. J. Great story. And George, I'm going to hand it over to you, brother, for some final thoughts, final words.
Thank you, Dr. J. I mean, there are multiple lines of evidence the evolutionists have presented that have resulted in egg on their face. When are they going to stop this silliness? Because just a recent paper I read, or some latest research that shows over 130,000 links to the so-called junk DNA is responsible for the development of limbs. I mean, they're gonna keep finding stuff like this, and they're gonna end up being far more embarrassed than they are today if they don't drop this silliness about the junk DNA. But that's enough on that. Because I'm conscious of your time, I always conclude with this statement about evolution. I say evolution is nothing more than presuppositions supported by a vivid imagination, unproven and unverifiable assumptions, biased and subjective interpretations, outlandish speculation and conjecture grounded in untestable hypotheses, which makes evolution no more than just so stories. Now, I particularly read The Origin of Species for the second time a couple of weeks ago. Now, what I found, and I actually read it for the first time back in the early 70s. Now, that particular conclusion that I just read, it was true in Darwin's time, and it's still true today. And I love the way you finish off all your critiques on those scientific articles, Dr. J, when you say, God bless and keep thinking. This is what they don't do. There's no critical thinking. And they end up with egg on their face.
Well, it's critical thinking in a whirlwind, in a vacuous place, but they don't know that. They can't know that. And the father of lies is very good at getting people to believe his lies and being trapped in an illusion. Well, it wouldn't be the first time that people trying to say we somehow made ourselves and we owe God nothing. It wouldn't be the first time that someone who's crediting themselves rather than God has been trapped in a whirlwind like that.
Amen. Well said, Dr. J.
Amen.
Well said, George. Brother, this has been a great show. Hour and a half has flown by. Thanks again, Dr. J, for giving us your time. I know how busy you are, so you're an incredible blessing, brother.
Yes.
So thank you.
Dr. J, I forgot to mention, we'll see you tomorrow, same time for part 2, okay?
He's joking, Dr. J. Don't worry.
I kind of have a meeting planned, but if it fell through, I wouldn't mind. Yes. Well, okay. God bless. Have
God
fun.
bless.
Take care. Be
God
good.
bless, Dr.
Bye-bye.
J.
God bless everybody.
Bye.